Back in 2003, Toyota launched the XA and XB in the US as the first models of their new Scion sub-brand, aimed at bringing in younger buyers with small, affordable, and customizable cars. With increased use of online marketing, quirky and offbeat ads, and even their own music and film line, sales peaked in 2006, but dropped every year after that, eventually leading Toyota to end Scion by 2016. This is the story of the Toyota sub-brand known as Scion. This is my old car.
It is that which makes us different that brings us together.
Thanks for the many suggestions to review cars from Scion. Scion is, admittedly, not really that old, but it does meet the criteria of my channel since they were around in the early 2000s and is no longer around today. Other than the later models that got rebranded as Toyotas, I rarely see any of them anymore. Let me know in the comments if you still regularly see lots of old Scion models where you live. Some of the Scion models may get their own future episodes. Back in the 90s, Toyota's average buyer age in the United States was increasing, thanks to cars like the Camry, which was a bestseller back in the days when most people bought cars instead of SUVs.
I'm too sexy for the slow lane.
The idea of a specific marketing strategy to bring in younger buyers to Toyota was officially launched in 1999, then called Project Genesis.
No!
Unlike what would eventually become Scion, the aim of Project Genesis was to take three Toyota cars whose market segments had been shrinking and market them together, but separately from other Toyotas. Those three cars were the Echo, a new subcompact being introduced that year that was known as the Yaris outside of the US, and the MR2 and the Celica, both of which had been in Toyota's lineup for many years, but each were starting new generations for the 2000 model year. Although the Echo sold to many young buyers at first, its bland, non-sporty styling would soon start attracting more older buyers. The mid-engine two-seater MR2 was simply too impractical for any young person to own as their only car, so it too was typically only sold to older buyers who could afford the MR2 as a second car. The Celica did the best of the three.
Slow down! This is a neighborhood!
But not enough to continue the Project Genesis experiment, which Toyota abandoned after only 2 years. After learning what worked and didn't work with Project Genesis, in 2001, Toyota began Project Exodus, which later was renamed to Scion. This was a fitting name since the word Scion refers to a descendant of a distinguished family, and with Toyota being one of the best-selling automakers in America, that pretty much sums up what they wanted Scion to be. The first reveals of Scion models were at the New York Auto Show in 2002, with two concepts, the BBX and the CCX. And their first two production cars, the XA and XB, were unveiled at the Los Angeles Auto Show in 2003, and it was the best place to unveil them, considering they would initially only be available for sale in about 100 existing Toyota dealerships in California that year. Had Scion only introduced the XA model at first, that car alone probably wouldn't have been enough to get anyone really interested in the new brand, since it didn't look much different than your typical Econobox. But Scion also released the XB, which far overshadowed the XA. Although the XB's extremely boxy design was hated by some, others loved it, not just because of its unique look, but also because the boxy shape was ideal for hauling people and cargo in such a compact space. I was among those back then who liked the look of the first gen XB, as I tend to like weird cars, and I still think today they pulled it off much better than two other notable attempts at a boxy design, the Honda Element, which debuted that same year, and the Nissan Cube, whose third generation made it to America and Europe in 2009. Scion also differed from parent Toyota with a strategy similar to the no-haggle pricing that GM had used for its Saturn and Geo brands. Scion called it pure price, meaning that there was a set base advertised price which the customer paid, with no markups allowed by the dealer. But Scion differed from the GM version in that Scions only had one trim level, on top of which the customer could then accessorize to their specific needs and budget. This eliminated what most cars had back then, and still do, which are various trim levels that in turn offer various pricing. Scion offered around 150 different accessories across its entire car line, and aftermarket companies soon started offering their own as well. By 2004, Scion started offering what they called their Release Series, starting with 1.0, as pre-packaged accessories, each with their own unique color, and only offered them in limited quantities to help increase brand awareness and demand. This proved very successful in the first few years, with these limited edition models selling out very quickly. By 2004, Scion dealerships were open nationwide, and the XB was outselling the XA by nearly 2 to 1. They soon also added a third model, the TC. Unlike the XA and XB, which were 5-door hatchbacks, the TC was a 3-door hatchback shaped more like a coupe, and at 55 inches in height, it was almost 7 inches lower than the already tiny XA. Whereas the XA had more of an econobox look, and the XB resembled a shrunken cargo van, the TC was aiming a bit more towards the affordable sports car market. Unlike the 1.4-liter four-cylinder offered in the XA and XB, which only made 108 horsepower, the TC had a 2.4-liter 16-valve 4, making 161 horsepower. The TC, whose name was intended to mean touring coupe, became Scion's bestseller by 2005. Although Scion still had advertisements on TV, it was the first automotive marque to rely more heavily on online marketing, including uploading ads to a new and yet unproven platform for marketing called YouTube. Their biggest online presence would be the launch of Scion Audiovisual, or Scion AV, in 2003. Scion AV produced records, music, videos, and live concerts for many new bands at the time, especially metal and garage rock. One of their most famous was the Scion Rock Fest that had concerts in different US cities each year, starting in 2009. Over the lifetime of Scion AV, which officially ended with the end of Scion in 2016, they had signed on over 1,500 artists and covered all the costs for producing and distributing their music. All proceeds went to the music artists, so Scion AV never earned a profit. By the way, if you do an internet search for Scion AV today, you'll find a website, but they have now rebranded themselves as a musical product and instrument company. By 2006, Scion hit their all-time sales high, with their 3 models gaining a combined total of over 173,000 in sales. The TC was still the top seller at almost 80,000 that year, but the XB wasn't too far behind at 61,000, and its sales had been increasing every year.
Pretty music.
Considering that fact, you would think that buyers had not yet grown tired of its boxy design, and instead continued to embrace it. Yet despite that, a second generation XB was introduced for the 2008 model year. Maybe Toyota thought that making the XB look a bit more mainstream would bring in more buyers, so the second gen was a similar shape, but a foot longer, and the corners more rounded off. Owners of the first gen XB, for the most part, hated the new look, and many who had considered but not yet gotten an XB were turned away. Even more odd was an ad for the second gen 2008 XB that actually called out that some people would love the car, while others would loathe it, which probably was more true for the first gen. Sales for the XB in 2007 dropped by 25% compared to the previous year, despite it being offered with a more powerful engine that was also in the TC. Meanwhile, the XA had always been in last place for Scion sales, so 2007 marked its end. In its place, Scion introduced the XD. Despite the new name, the XD had the same basic dimensions as the XA, so it really looked more like a second-gen XA, but maybe Toyota thought the latter model's poor sales required a new name. The XD did have a better engine than the XA, a 1.8-liter making 128 horsepower, but not many people cared, with the XD selling less than a third of what the XA had done the year before. But by 2007, Scion had at least accomplished one of its goals, to have a significantly lower average buyer age than parent company Toyota. Whereas the average Toyota buyer that year was 54, the average Scion buyer was 39, making it the lowest in the industry. The TC model alone would later achieve an average age of 29, the lowest for any individual car model at that time. With the US entering the recession of 2008, Scion sales for that year suffered as a result, and dealers were unable to recover losses by making any price adjustments of their own, thanks to the no-haggle, pure price requirement. By 2009, with Scion still selling the first-gen XD and TC, and the second-gen XB, total sales were only a third of their best sales year, just 3 years earlier. Production of the second-gen TC started in 2010, with almost the exact same footprint as the first gen, but with a bit more angular styling, and a 2.5-liter 4 making 180 horsepower. But sales of the TC after 2010 were far less than their peak just 4 years earlier. 2010 also marked the first model year that the Scion brand was offered in Canada, although initially only in major cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Yet their total sales were still shrinking despite the addition of Canadian sales. 2011 marked the debut of the first completely new addition to the Scion brand since the TC, I'm not counting the XD as a new addition since it wasn't much different than the XA it replaced. This latest Scion wasn't a new car for Toyota, having been sold in Japan and Europe since 2008. This newest Scion was the IQ, and was the smallest Scion yet. Although it was technically a 4-seater, putting adults in the rear seat was a tight fit. And it had almost zero cargo space with the rear seats up. And it offered the smallest engine in any Scion ever, a 1-liter 4, making just 68 horsepower. Its top sales year was 2012, with less than 8,000 sold, and was gone by 2014, since the model built for Japan was also discontinued that same year. By the way, the IQ was also the basis for a model sold by Aston Martin. Yes, that Aston Martin, the same company that builds cars for James Bond.
Oh, and I suppose that's completely inconspicuous.
In 2011, Aston Martin sold a car in Europe called the Signet, which was a rebadged IQ, but with a more plush interior, an Aston Martin grille, and a price 3 times higher than the IQ. Its sole purpose for existing was to lower the Aston Martin fleet's emission average due to new regulations imposed for the European Union in 2012. Initially only offered for sale in the UK, they only sold 150 there, and later only an additional 150 were sold when offered for sale in the rest of Europe, meaning only 300 were sold in just 2 years, after which Aston Martin mercifully pulled the plug. Today, some of these cars have actually appreciated in value, but only because of the extremely low number that were ever sold. Scion went in a completely different direction for its next all-new model, the FRS. Built in collaboration with Subaru, which debuted the similar BRZ that same year, and built in a Subaru factory. The FRS was sold in Japan as a Toyota 86, and in Europe as a Toyota GT86. Unlike the vaguely similarly shaped TC, the FRS was not a hatchback, and it had a 200 horsepower flat 4 that was also a joint effort between Toyota and Subaru. It also was the first Scion to have rear-wheel drive, further confirming its purpose as a performance car and not an econobox. But that last difference made many potential buyers question why Toyota included the FRS with the Scion brand in America, which by then had been shrinking in sales every year and was geared towards younger buyers that needed affordable cars. Yet the FRS was trying to market itself as a higher-end sports car, which really didn't fit the Scion image.
Let's get it on!
Despite the addition of the FRS, sales across all Scion cars was dropping each year. So much so that Toyota dealers, which also sold Scions, were allowed to drop the Scion branding in their dealerships, beginning in 2013. Despite that, by 2015, there were still over 1,000 Scion showrooms, way more than needed for their market share, resulting in an average of less than 5 Scions sold by each dealer each month. By 2015, Scion attempted a complete overhaul of the brand as a last-ditch effort to save it.
Hey look, it's car dealership Tube Man and the new Scion IA.
Gone was the XB, the XD, and the IQ. In their place was the IA, which was a rebadged version of the Mazda 2, and the IM, which was based on the Toyota Auris sold outside the US, sharing a platform with the Toyota Corolla. But neither the IA or IM helped save the brand, selling a combined total in 2015 that was less than the remaining XBs that were still unsold. In February of 2016, Toyota officially announced the Scion brand would be phased out, and they would rebrand some of the former Scion models as Toyotas. The IA became the Yaris IA, and the IM became the Corolla IM for 2017, and the FRS was simply rebadged as a Toyota 86, as it already was in Japan. The first gen 86 and BRZ have continued to sell in America, and a second generation of both cars started production in 2021 for the 2022 model year.
So they are in a midlife crisis of that.
Because of the relatively low sales across the entire Scion lineup, and due to the constant shift towards SUVs, seeing a Scion today, at least in my town, is relatively rare, despite having only officially ended just 5 years ago from the date of this video.
See this Scion TC?
It's just been auto-tuned.
Considering the obsession in America with SUVs that has been ongoing for many years, it is surprising that Toyota didn't add a taller SUV-like vehicle into the Scion lineup, considering the closest thing they had to a utility-type vehicle was the XB. Makes you wonder if Scion would still be around today if they had brought back the original XB. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
Did I do...